Blake Lively thought she had the perfect case. Judges kept granting motions, lawyers kept bending to her demands, and for a moment it looked like she was unstoppable. But behind the courtroom door, her entire case is being ripped apart piece by piece, and the shocking truth is about to leave her reputation in ruins. Stay tuned, because what you're about to hear. Blake Lively believed she had the perfect case. She walked into the courtroom with her lawyers beside her, her head held high. Her team, feeding the press every whisper that made it seem like she was winning, because the judge kept granting her motions, because discovery kept leaning in her favor, and to the outside world, it looked like the walls of Hollywood power were falling at her feet. But what people did not see, what the cameras did not show, was that behind those thick courthouse doors, a storm was forming, a storm so precise, so calculated, so merciless, that every step Blake took forward was being pulled out from beneath. Her, with cold legal hands, she thought she had won because she was allowed to dig deeper into motions to compel. She thought that every motion granted was another brick on her throne. But the truth, my friends, the truth is darker than she could have ever imagined. Because judges in these cases, they do not want to look as though they are silencing someone who may claim harassment. They do not want the world to accuse them of blocking justice. So yes, they let her request documents. Yes, they allowed discovery. Yes, they permitted the digging. But granting discovery is not the same as granting victory. And that is where Blake and her team miscalculated. Because while she was celebrating every motion won, her opponents were sharpening their knives, preparing the strike, and that strike came in the form of Jed Wallace and his team. Jed Wallace is no Hollywood mogul, no producer, no employer. He was a consultant, an agent, a hired publicist with no permanent power in the industry, yet he is the one who has turned into her most dangerous opponent, because he and his lawyers are not playing a game of theatrics. They are not leaking to the press. They are not screaming for sympathy. They are dismantling her case with surgical precision. Every line of her complaint is being dissected. Every allegation is being stripped bare until what is left is nothing but words, collapsing under the weight of law. And that is where the nightmare begins, because her entire foundation rests on reputational harm, on smear campaigns, on whispers and headlines. And what Jed Wallace has done is simple yet devastating. He has exposed the heart of her case as defamation in disguise. He has told the judge in brutal, icy words that everything she claims retaliation, everything she claims harassment, is nothing more than an attempt to repackage defamation. And in New York law, that matters, because defamation comes with rules, with limitations, with impossible standards for public figures like Blake. And when Jed Wallace's lawyers write their responses, they are not emotional, they are not messy, they are lethal. Their tone is sharp, clinical, relentless. Her 2 paragraphs in response to his 31-page brief were mocked as hardly a response at all, and that is not just a line, that is a dagger, because it tells the court she has nothing, that her armor is hollow, that she is standing in the middle of a battlefield, wearing paper and believing it is steel. And the filings are clear. They say retaliation. Laws are not for hypotheticals. They are not for imagined smear campaigns. They are not for reputational bruises. They are for real employment actions, real retaliation. And what Blake has is nothing more than a theory, a dramatic story, a tale of being silenced before she even spoke out. And that, my friends, is not retaliation. That is speculation. And the law does not bend for speculation. The law cuts it apart. And so here she is telling the world she was targeted by Wallace, telling the world. There was a campaign to mark her as rude, to call her tone deaf, to frame her as careless with domestic violence promotion. But when pressed, when placed under oath, when asked to produce evidence, she admitted she could not name a single article, a single statement from Jed Wallace himself that hurt her reputation. Not one, and in that moment, her entire house of cards began to fall. Because how can someone claim destruction of reputation by the hands of a man when not a single act can be pinned on him? And this is the brilliance of Wallace's defense. They are not trying to argue emotions. They are not battling in gossip columns. They are using her own words, her own admissions, her own filings against her. And each time they quote her, it is like another brick is pulled from the base of her case until the structure trembles. And when it trembles, everyone who supported her sees the cracks spreading like wildfire across the foundation. Because even her reliance on California law, even her attempt to invoke the Fair Employment and Housing Act, is collapsing under its own weight. Because she admitted her claims stem from harassment in New Jersey. She filed in New York, and now she drags California law into it, hoping it will save her. But the law is merciless. California courts have said it again and again that FIHE does not apply outside California. It does not apply to non-residents. It does not apply to conduct. That never happened in California. And her own words. Her own. Admissions confirm that none of the harassment she describes happened there, so her entire case is like trying to build a castle on quicksand, and Jed Wallace's team is watching it sink while guiding the judge through every inch of the collapse. This is not just defense. This is demolition. It is cold legal demolition, designed to make sure that when the dust clears, Blake is left with nothing but fragments of a story that cannot stand in court. And yet she continues to push forward blind to the fact that every motion granted, every discovery allowed is not a win, but a trap. A trap that leads her deeper into a labyrinth where every turn exposes another fatal flaw in her arguments. And the irony is cruel, because in her desperation to find a forum that would favor her, she forum shopped. She picked New York thinking it would give her power, and yet it is New York law that is gutting her claims, because in California she would have faced stricter notice rules, stricter procedures, and she bypassed them thinking she was clever. And yet it is that very choice that is unraveling her entire case before her eyes. And this is the storm she did not see coming. Because Wallace's lawyers are not theatrical, they are not emotional. They are precise, they are relentless, they are like surgeons cutting away at every weak muscle until nothing remains but the skeleton of a case that cannot stand on its own. And as Blake Lively watches her case dismantled as her claims reduced, to whispers as her reputation teeters on the edge of collapse, the question now is not whether she will win, but how much she will lose. Because this is not just about law. This is about perception. This is about narrative. And as her own filings betray, her enemies are using her own words as the noose tightening around her case and her reputations, everything. And now, as the second act of this unfolding disaster begins, the walls close tighter around Blake Lively, because the very tactics she thought would shield her are becoming the blades that cut her down. She believed discovery was her battlefield, that with every motion granted, she was amassing an arsenal of weapons. But the truth is that discovery without evidence is like holding a sword made of glass. It shatters the moment it strikes, and Jed Wallace knows this. He has turned her entire effort to dig into nothing but a parade of futility because what she seeks cannot be delivered. What she thinks she will uncover is not there, and while she burns her energy chasing shadows, he dismantles her actual claims with cold, ruthless efficiency. Her retaliation theory is built on sand because retaliation requires a real act, a real moment, a real line crossed, and she has nothing tangible, nothing solid. Instead, she tells the story of a smear campaign of whispers and leaks designed to make her look rude, tone deaf, careless with the issue of domestic violence. And she insists this was no ordinary criticism, but rather a conspiracy to bury her credibility before she ever spoke against Justin Baldoni. But Wallace is tearing that apart. Because retaliation law is not built for what-if scenarios. It is built for real protected activities, followed by real adverse actions. And she cannot prove that any of this happened the way she tells it, because she admitted under oath she could not even name a single defamatory article tied to Wallace, not one. And yet she tells the world she was silenced, destroyed, targeted, systematically dismantled by a man who, according to her own words, has no fingerprints on the crime she describes. And here lies the cruel brilliance of the defense. They do not need to shout. They do not need to paint her as a villain. They only need to repeat her words. They only need to highlight her contradictions. They only need to expose the cracks she carved into her own case, and every time they quote her complaint, every time they circle her sworn admissions, every time they lay bare the legal contradictions, the illusion of her perfect case collapses further into rubble. And what makes this worse is her reliance on California law, the Fair Employment and Housing Act, which she clings to as if it could rescue her. But the reality is brutal. That law only applies within California, to residents of California to conduct. That happened in California. And Blake admitted her harassment took place in New Jersey. She sued in New York and now tries to drag California statutes into the battlefield, as though the borders of states and the authority of courts can bend to her will. But law is not celebrity. Law does not bow to fame, and her attempt to stretch it only exposes the weakness of her case because the defense pounced. They told the judge directly that her reliance on California law is fatal, not weak, not flawed, fatal, because she is not a California resident, because none of the conduct occurred there because her own complaint admits it happened elsewhere. And when the law is this clear, there is no room for sympathy. There is only dismissal, and Wallace's team has made that clear. with the sharpest of tones reminding the court that courts have said time and again, FEHA does not extend outside California, period. And so her reliance on that law is like leaning on a crumbling wall. It collapses the moment she puts weight on it, and from there, the dismantling only grows sharper, because even if FEHA somehow applied her retaliation theory still makes no sense. She argues that Wallace and others spread rumors to silence her before she ever accused Justin Baldoni, but retaliation, law requires action after a protected activity. Not speculation before, and what she presents is hypothetical. It is like accusing someone of punishing you for what you might say in the future. And the court does not reward hypotheticals. It demands proof of cause and effect. It demands evidence of a real event that triggered retaliation, and she has none. She has only theories, speculation, and contradictions. And when pressed under oath, she admitted the fatal blow that she cannot name one defamatory article or statement. Wallace published, she claimed a media blitz destroyed her reputation, yet cannot identify a single piece of evidence tying him to it. And that admission alone is dynamite. It levels her claims because if the one man she accuses of orchestrating her downfall cannot be tied to a single word, then what is left? Nothing but a crumbling story. And this is why Wallace's lawyers are cold, clinical, and relentless. They do not need fireworks, they do not need grand speeches, they simply slice through her allegations one by one like a surgeon removing diseased tissue until nothing is left but the hollow bones of a case that was never as strong as she thought. And what makes this more devastating is the contradiction in her own behavior. Because if she was truly harassed as she claims, why did she not distance herself from those she accused? Why did she not protect herself? Why did she not create space? Instead, she demanded more control, more involvement, more closeness. To the very project and the very people she accused, including Justin himself. That is not the behavior of someone fleeing harassment. That is the behavior of someone seeking leverage, seeking power, seeking control. And when a jury hears this contradiction, when they see the evidence of her demanding greater control after alleged harassment, the question will not be whether she was a victim, but whether she was playing a dangerous game using claims as bargaining chips. And if that is the perception, she will not only lose in law, she will lose in public opinion because people can forgive mistakes. They can forgive weakness, but they do not forgive manipulation. And Wallace's team has framed this entire case, not as retaliation, not as harassment, but as reputational gamesmanship, as an elaborate attempt to weaponize the law to fight battles of control and perception. And when they tell the judge that her claims against Wallace sound entirely in defamation, they are not exaggerating, they are exposing that everything she says about reputational injury is at its core a defamation claim disguised under other labels to escape the strict requirements of defamation law. And in New York, that disguise cannot survive because the court sees through it, the law pierces it, and the result is fatal. Her complaint collapses into dust under the weight of the defamation exception. And the irony is that by choosing New York to file in thinking, she could gain power by using its procedures. She doomed herself because California would never have allowed her the evidence grab she made with subpoenas. But New York law, with its defamation exception, is the very thing tearing her case apart. She forum shopped, and in doing so, she sabotaged. Herself, she chose the battleground, and it is that very battleground that is swallowing her case whole. And now Wallace's attorneys are not only defending him, they are giving Wayfair, and the other defendants a roadmap, a blueprint for how to slice through her claims, just as they are doing. Because if her reliance on FEHA collapses for Wallace, it collapses for them too. If her retaliation theory is exposed as hypothetical for Wallace, it is hypothetical for them too. If her own admissions destroy her case against Wallace, they destroy her case against everyone. And that is why this defense is not just dismantling her lawsuit, it is detonating it from the inside out, leaving nothing but fragments scattered on the courthouse floor. And as Blake Lively tries to hold on to the illusion of victory, as she tries to convince the world that discovery wins means she is succeeding. The truth is pouring in like floodwaters, overwhelming her foundation, tearing apart every wall she built. And the question now is not if she will lose, but how catastrophic the loss will be, because this is not a battle of perception. This is not a war of words. This is the cold, sharp, merciless strike of law against illusion. And as the third chapter of this relentless destruction begins, the tension builds higher. The air feels heavier, every revelation stacking on the last until the weight becomes unbearable. Because now we are no longer dealing with speculation. We are staring directly into the chasm of contradictions that Blake Lively herself has created. Contradictions that her lawyers cannot erase. Contradictions that Jed Wallace and his team will hammer again and again until the sound echoes inside the courtroom like the pounding of a war drum. Because it is not just that she has no evidence. It is that her own story keeps unraveling under her own words. First, she claims she was silenced, targeted, and destroyed. Yet in the same breath, she admits that no one prevented her from speaking. No one cut off her voice. No one shut the door to her platforms. She still stood on stages. She still gave interviews. She still appeared at events. And so the idea that she was silenced is a fabrication, a carefully crafted illusion designed to make her seem like a victim. But victims do not continue to speak. They do not continue to shine on red carpets, while simultaneously telling courts they were buried alive. And this is where the hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore because she insists she was annihilated reputationally, yet continued to leverage her fame to amplify her projects, to secure appearances to push forward her narrative. She claims devastation but lives visibility, and when that duality is presented to a judge or jury, it will not look like trauma, it will look like performance. And Wallace's team knows this. They know the power of contrast. They know the devastating impact of showing a jury her own words side by side with her public actions, because while she weeps on paper in her complaint, she smiles in reality under the spotlight. And the human mind cannot reconcile those two images without doubting her, and doubt is fatal in the courtroom. Doubt is the poison that spreads quickly through every juror's mind until it consumes the credibility of a witness entirely, and once credibility is gone, the case is gone too. And this is the exact trap Blake has walked into. She has given the defense every tool they need to dismantle her from the inside, because it is not only the contradiction of her silence claim, it is also the contradiction of her retaliation theory. She insists she was retaliated against for speaking up, but admits she had not spoken up. At the time, she insists whispers were part of a coordinated smear, yet cannot show a single piece of evidence tying Wallace to those whispers. She insists she was broken down systematically, but cannot name the bricklayers of that system she has constructed a house of smoke, and is now choking on it because Wallace keeps blowing air through every gap until nothing remains but haze and ashes. And as this continues, the suspense thickens because her team realizes they are being cornered. They try to spin discovery wins as proof of momentum. They try to present subpoenas as victories, but victories of paper mean nothing if the case itself cannot survive the blade of the law, and the law is cutting deeper with every motion, every reply, every line of precedent cited by Wallace's team. And what makes this even more dramatic is the cold indifference of the court. Because judges do not bend to fame. Judges do not care if the tabloids worship your smile. Judges care about statutes and precedent. And when Wallace points out that fee hay cannot apply outside California, the judge cannot invent a bridge across state lines. When Wallace points out that retaliation requires actual protected activity, the judge cannot stretch the definition to include thoughts or fears of future speech. And when Wallace highlights that all her reputational injuries sound in defamation, the judge cannot ignore that defamation has its own laws, its own rules, its own strict barriers, and those barriers are not forgiving. And so what is happening now is not merely a defense. It is a demolition. Every filing, another crack, every argument, another swing of the hammer until the foundation crumbles, and she is left standing in the ruins of her own making. And here lies the deeper tragedy for Blake. Lively, she believed her star power would shield her. She believed her fame would bend the narrative in her favor. She believed that the courtroom could be another stage, another script where she could play the role of the wronged woman and have the audience cheer. But the courtroom is not Hollywood. The courtroom is merciless. The courtroom is where illusions go to die. And now she stands exposed, not as a victim, but as an architect of contradictions. And the audience is not cheering. The audience is watching the dismantling, with cold eyes, calculating eyes, weighing credibility against evidence and finding her wanting. And the suspense rises again because this is not yet the end. This is not yet. The final strike, Wallace's team is saving that for trial if it even reaches trial, because motions to dismiss could eviscerate entire claims before a jury ever hears them. But if it does reach trial, the stage will be set for the ultimate collapse, where her own testimony becomes the rope that strangles her case, where her own exhibits become the blades that cut her credibility, and every juror who hears her say she cannot name a single defamatory article will remember it. Every juror who hears her admit the harassment occurred outside California will remember it. Every juror who hears her insist retaliation happened before she spoke will remember it, and memory is lethal because once planted, it grows and strangles all her other claims, no matter how emotional, no matter how dramatic her presentation may be. And as this realization dawns, the panic within her camp grows, because the more they push their narrative, the more contradictions surface, the more they try to twist discovery into a trophy. The more obvious it becomes that discovery without evidence is just noise, paper without proof, a hollow victory. And while they celebrate subpoenas, Wallace celebrates dismissals. While they count documents, Wallace counts legal victories, and the imbalance grows wider and wider until the weight of defeat presses down, crushing her illusion, until all that is left is the cold, undeniable truth that this lawsuit is crumbling faster than she can rebuild it. And with every passing moment, the suspense loops tighter around her throat because she is not just losing a case. She is losing the perception she crafted, the image she curated, the story she believed she could sell. Because when the law tears apart the lies, there is nothing left to sell. No role to play, no curtain to hide behind, only the truth exposed under the harshest light imaginable. And so as the dust settles, the reality becomes unavoidable. Blake Lively stands at the center of a storm she thought she could control. But the winds are tearing her narrative apart. Every contradiction, every hollow claim, every desperate attempt to twist discovery into salvation has collapsed under the weight of truth. And now the image of the invincible star is gone, stripped away by the merciless blade of law and logic, because fame cannot bend statutes and charm cannot erase precedent. Her case was never about justice, it was about illusion, and illusions cannot withstand the spotlight forever. The court is not swayed by applause or adoration, it listens only to evidence, and in that arena, she has none. She is left exposed, surrounded by smoke and fragments of arguments that lead nowhere, and the audience is not fooled anymore. They see the performance for what it was, an act, a role written too hastily, staged too poorly, and now collapsing in real time. This is the tragedy of her downfall. Not that she was attacked unfairly, but that she overplayed her hand, believed too deeply in her ability to manipulate perception, and in doing so walked directly into the trap of her own contradictions. And as the gavel comes closer to falling, as motions line up like final strikes, her story narrows to a single inevitable conclusion. Defeat, not because she lacked fame or influence, but because she lacked truth, and truth in the end is always heavier than illusion.